Sup folks, what I'm going to show you how to do now is build a rig suitable for building previs animations. That is pre-visualized animations, not your final animation. So you'll notice how simple this rig is. She essentially looks like a puppet and behaves in much the same way. I can get some very basic poses from her, but I'm not going to be doing anything highly detailed. I don't have any finger controls, no facial controls. There'll be no fine details on this character because that's not what this whole phase of production is about. Previs happens at the very beginning when you and your director or lead designer are trying to decide what animations best fit your game or your film. You want something that is very simple and very quick to use, forcing you to work in very broad brushstrokes. Alright, so first of all, let me just take you through what it is that you're seeing here and what it is you're going to be creating yourself as you follow along with this video. Now, first of all, I must mention that I am currently working out of Maya 2015. A lot of the tools that I use are still available in 2016, and everything I'm saying you can do in every other 3D program. It's just that some of your tools might be named slightly differently. So when you are trying to Google that, just say, hey, what is the Blender word for a NURBS controller, for example. Okay, so speaking of NURBS controllers, what you're looking at and what I've been moving around are these little blue wireframes, and these are my controllers. I use these to, as you might guess, control the rig. Now you might be wondering why it is that I am actually moving these controllers around and not the actual bones or joints sitting inside, which you can see if I just turn off my skeleton or my previs layer there. So why am I using these controllers and not the actual joints themselves, which, as you can tell, if I enable the ability to select it, I can actually move around and animate, in theory, just as effectively. The reason I'm not actually setting any animation keyframes on the joints themselves is because I'm human and I'm prone to make mistakes. And let's say I'm animating and I do something quite derpy, moving a joint out of position to a place that's just hideously ugly. But I might not have noticed until much later in the animation, so I can't exactly control Z back in time. Well, ideally, what I should be able to do is return it to a default position, back to where it was, in relation to everything else on screen. When I select this joint, you'll notice in the channel box area here on the right that I have all these numerical values tracking where that joint is in space at any given time and the rotations that have been put on it. Now, like I said, in an ideal world, I should be able to send these all back to a default state of nothing. It is what it is. So I should be able to hit 0 and zero all these out. Only what actually happens if I do that to a joint, you'll see that it freakishly collapses on itself. If I turn the character previs back on, that's hideous and wrong. Yuck. So no, we are not going to be placing animation on the joints themselves because these controllers, if I select each controller, you will notice that I am actually able to send them back to a default state. In fact, if I make it so that I cannot select my skeleton, I'm using that, by the way, or I'm doing that using this layer box over here. I can turn a layer on and off. I can set it to reference so that I can't accidentally select it. I can set it to template so it becomes like this sort of ghostly gray outline. And I can, of course, as you see, color code them as well. So this enables me to go through and grab pretty much all of my controllers. Let's just grab the rest of those, and I can zero all of them out, return them to their default position, and turn my character puppet back on. And this enables me to clean up a lot of animation mistakes that I might make along the way. So those are the controllers. That's where you're going to be putting the majority of your keyframes. Now what you saw when I turned that character Previs layer on and off was the skeleton on the inside of that character. And I'll just make that a bit more visible here. So this skeleton contains all of the... This is made up of all the joints that then move your puppet through space. And now this is a relatively simple skeleton. This is a 20 joint skeleton. Now I must emphasize that you should only ever have as many joints as absolutely necessary, because moving every single one of these joints through space is part of what slows down your game or your animation. So the more joints and characters you have flying around on the screen, the slower your frames per second. So when we build this rig, we will be building a skeleton of our own. Now, connecting the skeleton, we have these somewhat hard to see lines, which are called IK handles, and that's what allows us to grab just one point of the skeleton and move it around, again, like a puppet. It acts like a puppet's strings would act. Now that's called an IK handle for inverse kinematics, and that's going to be something we will set up after our skeleton is built. And the connections between one of my NURBS controllers here and the rest of the skeleton is called a constraint. We'll be using constraints to connect our controllers to our skeleton. Alright, so that's everything we are going to cover. Now I do have another character that we can play with, and we will build a little rig for this tiny little guy here. So that's what's coming up in the next segment, which we will get to shortly.